I think we've discovered a huge unexpected twist that's coming soon in the Elbaf arc, and I think we can prove it. At least as much as it can be proven without the Elbaf arc finishing. There's something super significant at the top of the Adam Tree, and it ties to a bunch of other unresolved One Piece mysteries, as well as some we think have never even been picked up on before. Ragnarok is coming, and it starts with Uranus destroying the Adam Tree, as recently suggested in chapter 1137. We just had this foreshadowed in 1141 with the tree branch matching what's shown on the mural. Also, we saw Elbaf is known to be weak to lightning and fire. This attack from Uranus will heat the world up and release the frozen giant prisoners under Punk Hazard, foreshadowed by other frozen giants such as Saul, Samwell Wolf, and the Yeti Cool brothers. Oda also hinted to this when Emu chose Elysia to test the Mother Flame because it's close. Emu's connections to Birkan technology go much deeper though, with the Mother Flame embodying Emu's ways, and the Light of Shandora embodying Joy Boy's ways. All of this results in the most advanced technology the One Piece world has ever seen. But what's Birka and Shandora got to do with Elbaf? Well, today we are going to show you what's at the top of the Adam Tree, and a huge secret Oda has been keeping about ancient technology. Throughout mythology, great trees like Yggdrasil connect realms such as heaven and hell, and the underworld. If the Adam Tree serves a similar purpose, its peak may hold divine significance, paralleled by Marijwa. Now, the first thing we should establish is whether there even is anything at the top of Elbaf. There are examples we can find in the One Piece world that tell us that this is indeed the case, likely at the top of the Adam Tree, or possibly even higher on a sky island above Elbaf. Oda foreshadowed this with the golden city of Shandora, which sits above Sky Pier at the top of Giant Jack. The giant part of its name refers to its enormous size for what looks like a young sapling, aka a baby tree, and Jack is a reference to the fable Jack and the Beanstalk, connecting us to the Adam Tree and fable theme of Elbaf. The Golden City acted as a mythical city in the sky in Nolan's backstory, and it symbolises a lost city in the clouds with significant historical importance. Another sky island that's relevant here is the hidden sky island village of Birka, which was also concealed high up in the clouds, confirmed when Enel could only find it once he'd taken flight on the Ark Maxim. Marijwa is another example. The Holy Land not only sits in the clouds on the top of the Red Line, but it resides above the Eve Tree. Marijwa has been referred to as the top of the world, for example by Sabo in the throne room, but we are yet to know if this is actually true. That said, it might be the case that in true One Piece fashion, the highest point is actually on the opposite side of the world, above Elbaf. Furthermore, Lunarians are a sky race that were once worshipped as gods, and they lived on the Red Line. We also have Torino Kingdom, aka the Treasure Kingdom, which is a small island with a huge tree in the center, evoking connections to the treasure tree Adam at the center of Elbaf. At the top of the tree lives giant birds, symbolizing their place at the top of the food chain on that island, demonstrated in cover pages that show the birds hunting humans. This is also hinted at in Torino Kingdom's name, as Tori means bird. In a Vivra card, Oda gave the birthday for one of the main birds that lives at the top of the tree in Torino, which is December the 8th, and the only character who shares this birthday is giant chieftain Ja Rule in Elbaf, indicating a subtle connection between the two islands. Additionally, despite having a savage reputation, Torino Kingdom is actually calm and houses a great library, paralleling Elbaf's epithet as the country of war and its library in the Adam Tree. At the bottom lives humans that are shorter than your average One Piece human, and on 2 occasions they state to be different from the humans on the other side of the Red Line, which likely reflects the giants of Elbaf. So throughout One Piece we have some strong examples of islands that show similar characteristics to Elbaf and each have something at the top of their respective trees, or in the case of Shandora, at the top of Giant Jack. So, what else do these examples tell us? By looking at the examples given, we can observe a pattern that tells us what might actually be at the top of Elbaf. In the Skypiea arc, the Sky Islands were ruled by Enel, who referred to himself as a god. Enel is tied to Elbaf through his resemblance to the lightning-wielding brother of Loki and Norse god Thor. We saw references to gods at the sacrificial altar of Shandora, and a sacred land called Verth was highlighted. Marijwa stands as a symbol of divine control over the world, and it houses the ruler of the world, who enforces godlike authority through systems such as the Heavenly Tribute. The Temryobito, meaning heavenly dragons, live in Marijwa and explicitly refer to themselves as gods, echoing Enel's character. Also, we saw Lunarians share a similar god theme at the top of the Red Line, as I mentioned earlier. In Torino Kingdom, the highest class of being is the giant birds at the top of the Treasure Island's tree, which are known to hunt humans. So, by following the pattern, we can infer that at the top of Elbaf, there's some sort of sacred location tied to gods or hierarchy. Now, Elbath is based on more Norse mythology, so the idea actually fits perfectly with the concept of Asgard. Asgard is the realm of the gods and is usually depicted above the mortal world. Evidence for this in One Piece can be seen when Loki describes the lowest level as Hell, or the underworld, and the readers see a diagram that illustrates heaven as the top, fitting the idea of Asgard being at the top of Elbath. But if that's the case, why haven't we heard about Asgard in the story already? Well, aside from attacks like Moria's Shadow Asgard and Kaido's 3-era Ragnarok, we actually have. When the Straw Hats reach Skypiea, Gangfall introduces the readers to the peak of the High West. Considering that the west of Skypiea is in the New World, which is where Elbath resides, and that Asgard would be really high up, this matches Ganfall's description perfectly. Furthermore, when talking to Luffy and Nami, Ganfall mentions that the path of the High West is longer than the way the Straw Hats came. The fact that the path is longer than the 10,000 meter ascent from the Blue Sea to the Sky Islands strongly suggests to the reader the other path is very far away, fitting Elbath's location deep in the New World. So does this mean the peak of the High West is Asgard? Ganfall also tells us that in order to cross the peak of the High West, people must pay an X-toll. This is a play on the word toll, and in the real world, a toll is a gate between borders and zones where you pay a fee to pass. However, X-toll actually means praise, suggesting if you pass through Asgard, you have to show praise, fitting the god themes of Asgard. So it would appear that indeed, the peak of the High West is the peak of Elbath. As such, Oda uses this path as a bridge to connect the narratives of the Sky Islands with Elbath and the New World. Some might have noticed recent connections between Elbath and the Sky Islands, such as False God Road mirroring False God Enel. We see the Straw Hats bouncing on clouds while talking about Sky Island. We also meet an owl that resembles Archimedes, possibly connecting to Haradas from Wotharia, who looks like Archimedes' counterpart in myth, Merlin. The connections between Elbath and the Sky Islands go back years, however, and are intricately woven to a pretty deep level. For example, with Nolan the Liar, a botanist which ties to Skypiea, and Usopp the Liar, a botanist with ties to Elbath. In Skypiea and Enel's cover story, we saw two locations named Birka. The name comes from the Viking city of Birka, which was one of the most important trading centers for Vikings, suggesting Oda has had something planned for Elbath and the Sky Races since at least back in Skypiea. For example, the Shandian warriors are depicted as mythical Norse soldiers, Valkyrie, highlighted by their giant shadows we saw in the clouds. The ancestors of the Shandorians reside in trees after they die, reflecting Norse mythology surrounding Yggdrasil. While the story strongly implies the Sky Islanders and Elbathians shared a relationship, how is this significant to the narrative? The answer is because Oda is going to bring all these connections together in Elbath in a way that should change the One Piece world moving forward. And it might be one of them things that when we do read-throughs in the future, it will provide a bit more context about some of the clues that were left behind. Oda will do this through shared technology, which is foreshadowed when Vegapunk revealed a huge Elbathian-style advanced robot, Emeth, who has ties to Joy Boy. That said, it's mainly demonstrated by other sky technology we see at Egghead, which matches technology we also saw in Wotharia and the Ark Maxim and the moon city of Birka. All these locations seem to share a very similar storage device for electricity, which could imply that there's a direct line from the Birkans to Vegapunk through technology, suggesting Vegapunk may have inherited this technology. Additionally, Vegapunk manifested the Mother Flame in Egghead. This was the fuel source used to power the ancient weapon that destroyed Lalesia, confirmed in Vegapunk's speech. The flame resembles the flame in a bubble seen in Wotharia, an island that similarly moves through the sky. Also, there was a flame on the moon murals in Enel's cover story, specifically the mural where sky people descended from the moon to the blue planet via what appears to be some flying craft, separate from the moon. These connections seem to point not only toward Vegapunk somehow using Birkan technology, but also the idea that the Mother Flame is specifically used in relation to something that can fly through the sky. From this, we can presume Oda is telling us that this specific advanced technology was inherited from the moon city of Birka to the Sky Islands of Wotharia, and then on to Vegapunk through Egghead, which ultimately resulted in the flying weapon Emu used in 1060. Oda showed us that advanced technology can come from the moon through a cover story. In the cover story, Dr. Tsukimi, which means Moon Watcher, dies when an explosion takes place on the moon, causing him to choke on his food, highlighting the fact that he was watching the moon intensely. Dr. Tsukimi is notable for developing automata, which we later found out is technology that's also on the moon. So Oda is developing the idea here that technology on the moon is advanced, as we've seen, and can also be replicated, as we've seen. If we dig deeper, we see it's the Birkan technology that plays a central role. Enel is a Birkan without wings, and he somehow mysteriously knew how to build the Ark Maxim, an advanced flying ship that evokes the ancient weapon Uranus. Haradas is another Birkan without wings, and in his Vivre card we learn that he was born on the Sky Island Birka 97 years ago, and at 30 years old, Haradas left to take part in constructing the artificial Sky Island of Witheria. So there's another example of a Birkan developing flying technology, but this time in the form of a moving Sky Island that affects weather elements. Vegapunk invented the Vega Force 1, which is flying technology that uses the same propellers as the Ark Maxim, reinforcing the theme of inherited Birkan technology. And of course we also saw Vegapunk making artificial clouds, right? Before meeting Vegapunk, Kuma went to Witheria first, and as a result likely connected Vegapunk with Haradas and Witheria, so Oda showed us how the tech was passed down. In one scene, Pythagoras even contacts Witheria directly via Denden, confirming that they share personal ties. We see the eventual effect Kuma had with Egghead Island and how his arrival was able to completely transform Egghead. At one point, Bonnie even describes how it went from a normal lab to a futuristic lab. When you compare the progress of Egghead to Punk Hazard, for example, it becomes more and more apparent how important Kuma really was to the development of Vegapunk's technology. We can see with the 22 years of unlimited funding as the director of Punk Hazard, Vegapunk somehow still lacked the ability to invent the same level of technology seen on Egghead. Vegapunk even mentioned how he always planned to do this on Punk Hazard. In chapter 1125, we see York inside the lab containing the Mother Flame, and as the other satellites were trying to fly away, she separated Punk records from the Labo phase. After disconnecting Punk records from the Mother Flame, the Vegapunk satellites discussed how they lack funds and more importantly materials, which is the part when Pythagoras mentions that's what friends are for and calls Witheria, as I mentioned. Lilith also told us Vegapunk went to Elbath, adding weight to the idea Vegapunk inherited ancient technology from the Sky People, potentially via the Path of the High West. Finally, we're still yet to be reintroduced to the last Super Rookie, and the only one to be from a Sky Island, Mad Monk Arouge. As well as being Birkan, Arouge is on Balloon Terminal, another moving Sky Island with more mysterious electromagnetic properties. Also, he's strangely tall, hinting at a connection to giants, and his characterization as a monk adorned with prayer beads likely connects to the god theme of Asgard. Now, earlier we said how the golden city of Shandora likely parallels Asgard, which sits in the clouds atop Elbath as a historically significant ancient mythical city. The golden city of Shandora had its own technology the locals called the Light of Shandora, contrasting the Birkan Mother Flame. So the Birkans had the flame, the Shandorans had the light. After inheriting technology through the era, it culminated in Vegapunk's recreation or rediscovery of the Mother Flame, which was then used to power something floating high in the sky, which destroyed Lalesia Kingdom. The subsequent hole left in Lalesia matching the hole at Enni's lobby tells us that the weapon we saw is Uranus, later confirmed by Vegapunk in 1116. Meaning that the ancient weapon named after the god of the heavens or sky is currently kept at Marijois. Marijois was built at the end of the Void Century, in other words, after the ancient weapons were made, so Uranus has not always been at Marijois. It would have had to have been somewhere else before that. All told, this suggests Uranus was in fact at the top of Elbath, so in other words, Uranus was Asgard, the city of the gods in the sky. This fits with the idea that the world was flipped, because as I said, Uranus then ends up at Marijois, under Emu's control. Now, if Birkan settled at the top of Elbath after they descended from the moon, then similar to the other parts of the One Piece world, they would likely be referred to as gods by the local inhabitants of the Adam Tree, mainly because of their advanced technology. Since we know Uranus is no longer there, it's likely when the Straw Hats reach the top of the Adam Tree, they will discover ruins, again paralleled by what they found at the lost city of Shandora, as well as a few other instances throughout One Piece. There's one in Alabasta, for example. This parallel goes deeper because the most sacred part of the city of Shandora is its golden bell. At Marineford, there's an ancient bell that's also been displaced called the Ox Lloyd Bell. The Ox-Lloyd bell wasn't originally from Marineford, but it was stated to have been brought there by a famous warship called the Ox-Lloyd. Now, Elbathians are known by their war theme, so it makes it seem that the Ox-Lloyd bell could be a remnant of Asgard. Also, as a quick aside, I mentioned Alabaster, and in Alabaster and Wano, they both go down into like the underworld vibe, sort of to find out the true history, right? So, like Skypiea, I imagine, in Elbath, rather than going down into the underworld, they're going to go up. That said, it's worth mentioning that, according to the children of Elbath, Elbath is no longer a country of war. The era has changed. In One Piece, the ending of an era is closely connected to destruction. In 1136, we saw this reinforced by interpretations of the Haley myth. Loki has made several threats to burn down his world, and when Big Mom lived in Elbath, she was called the god of destruction by two different characters. Many fans will be aware that the Norse equivalent to the end of the world and symbolism of the changing era is Ragnarok. This was hinted back in Wano, as I mentioned earlier, when Kaido used Three Realms Ragnarok, which directly ties to Elbath with its three realms. We can presume Ragnarok is not only on its way, but it's very close, mainly through Loki's character. What was Loki chained to? The World Tree. In 1127, it said the World Tree will burn, echoed in 1130 by Loki saying he will burn the world down. Also, despite it being over a decade, Loki is somehow still alive, so we have a snake at the bottom of the World Tree wanting to destroy the world, somehow sustaining itself. This is a direct reference to Nidhogg, feeding off the life of the roots of the World Tree in Norse mythology. But how does this tie into the Mother Flame and Uranus? The reason Emu wanted to use the Mother Flame on a target close to Marijwa is likely because the Mother Flame heats up, as flames do, which we see echoed in Vegapunk's version, which is kept in fluid. Now, why would Emu not want the Mother Flame to heat up too much? Is there anything that Emu is trying to keep cold? Well, in fact, yes, we know there is, because in 905, Emu went deep into the belly of Marijwa and opened a sealed room that's been kept frozen. After the attack on Lalesia, sea levels rose by 1 meter, indicating the Mother Flame did in fact heat up enough to melt ice and cause the sea to rise. This was likely the reason for the earthquakes we saw afterwards as well. Not only that, but what else do we see frozen throughout the One Piece world? Giants. In Norse mythology, frozen giants are central to Ragnarok, representing chaos and primal forces opposing the gods. Loki, closely tied to the giants, leads them alongside his monstrous children, Fenrir, a loyal wolf amongst others. The giants' efforts result in the death of many gods, marking the end of the current world. However, their destructive role is part of a cosmic cycle, paving the way for renewal and rebirth. Throughout One Piece, we see giants that are frozen. For example, the giant prisoners in Punk Hazard. Soul's recent update in the story confirmed that ice can preserve giants, and when thawed, they do return to life, highlighted through Ayakichi's aptly named Ice Time capsule that he used to freeze Soul. We see Kuzan freeze another giant, which is Samwon Wolf of the Blackbeard Pirates. Oars was also preserved in ice, only to be later revived by Moria, and we also see Scotch and Rocks, the giant Yeti Cool Brothers, guarding something frozen. So there's plenty of imagery building up frozen giants in the One Piece world, but if it requires Uranus and the Mother Flame to unleash them, then what will Emu use Uranus on? So if Uranus is used again, but somewhere further away from Marijwa than the Leisure Kingdom, does this mean the Mother Flame will heat up the ice around the world and unleash the frozen giants? Well, if we follow Ragnarok, then that means the destruction of the Adam Tree will start a massive war, giving us a candidate for where Emu might strike with Uranus. Such a distance would fit perfectly with our earlier speculations that the island is likely far away from Marijwa. But there's a lot more going on with Uranus than its destructive capabilities, I believe. The Elbath mural depicted something akin to the Maxim striking the tree with electricity. As I've mentioned in other videos, interpretation plays a key role in deciphering the Elbath mural. So, on one hand, it looks like the ship is destroying the tree, however, it could also foreshadow something quite opposite. Like many things in the One Piece world, the image and the purpose of Uranus may have been demonized. If Emu was the one who used the Uranus to destroy Enies Lobby, which in turn frames the ancient kingdom as evil, then maybe Uranus originally had a different purpose. An artificial island that hints at this is Witheria, which not only can produce rain, but can even make it sunny with its own artificial sun. We know Witheria is able to do this because when Haradas is negotiating with the villagers in a cover page, he points to a sheet with different weather options available, and one of them shows a sun. In a similar way that the counter to Pluton had blueprints that were passed down from generation to generation on Water 7, it may have been that the Maxim blueprints have also been passed down in a similar manner. We see that the Maxim and Uranus both have similar explosions and aftermaths. Either way, it demonstrates that both were made with ancient Birkan technology. Now, the reason why Vegapunk's Labophase and Wavaria were so similar to Uranus is because they were also using ancient Birkan technology. However, it goes even deeper. The big twist about Elbaf won't just be that Uranus was Asgard, but it appears that before Uranus was an ancient weapon, it had a different name. So when Uranus was instead helping people with weather conditions to, for example, grow crops, I believe its name was the Emerald City, and it plays an integral role in understanding how Emu managed to convince the 20 kingdoms to ally. So what evidence is there that tells us that Uranus is in fact the Emerald City? In chapter 224 of One Piece, Bellamy mentioned 3 legends of the One Piece world: the City of Gold, the One Piece, and the Emerald City, all of which are stated to be remnants of the Pirate Dream era. Since then, the Straw Hats found the Golden City, so we know it's real. Whitebeard told us in his last words that the One Piece is real. And finally, Luffy told us that the Emerald City is real. Vegapunk mentions a futuristic city from the past, and Nami describes treasures of the future as being flowers made of jewels, evoking imagery that could connect to the Emerald City. In real life, emeralds were considered the highest treasure shipped out of the New World by pirates, more so than gold even, which tells the reader, in One Piece, the Emerald City had some intrinsic value, or some special resource like God Valley. In the One Piece anime, the weapon above Lalesia glows a bright green, hinting towards the Emerald City. When using a UV light on an emerald, it will glow red, matching what we saw in the anime once the weapon was being used. If Uranus is the Emerald City, it adds to the idea that it was used to control weather through the Alabastan town of Amrumalu, which was a town that was said to be ravaged by violent changes in sea level, of course something we saw after the destruction of Lalesia Kingdom. So this could be a clue that was left all the way back in chapter 161 by Oda. And of course in the same arc we saw dance powder and stuff like that, so it's interesting. Also, I think it's in chapter 167 there's a character called Kappa that names the village and mentions that he has a sick friend that lives there. There are some Wizard of Oz connections that could foreshadow the eventual appearance of the Emerald City in Elbaf. The Straw Hats first start off with a literal brick road, and we see another reference with the sleeping mists, which is similar to Dorothy sleeping in the poppy fields before getting taken to the Emerald City. Not only was the Emerald City hinted at in Elbaf, it was foreshadowed more so in Egghead Island, which is the arc that directly precedes Elbaf. The two arcs are connected with the setup of Saul and O'Hara, along with the giant pirates making their 100-year debut and saving the Straw Hats. Vegapunk, who is the central figure of the Egghead arc, is directly inspired by the Wizard of Oz. Oda's inspiration for the Sky Islands might have been taken from the Sky Islands in the Oz books as well. After all, the center of Egghead is one giant sky island. Vegapunk's first appearance all the way back in Water 7 and his eventual full reveal on Egghead parallels the manner in which Oz was also revealed. They both were portrayed to be these all-powerful beings who could perform miracles and do anything you could imagine. However, eventually we found out they were kind of more just like a goofy old man. The fact that they were perceived like this, but they turned out not to be like this, will become absolutely crucial in One Piece, and I'll explain why later on in the video. Another tie-in is that the book version of Oz has an egg-shaped head connecting to the name of the island and Vegapunk's brain, because it's located inside Punk records. Vegapunk's head was described as a hot air balloon, which is strange considering the hot air balloon the Wizard of Oz has. Not only is Vegapunk's physical appearance similar to Oz, but both are characterized in very similar ways. Both are said to be the greatest wizard in each of their respective worlds. In One Piece, Vegapunk is viewed as the father of modern science and the most useful man in the world. We also know that Vegapunk describes Egghead as like a mirage, and also remarks how half of it is just a hologram. Super important detail. In chapter 1065, Vegapunk starts to allude to how Egghead wasn't the only island like this, and continues to say that there used to be a futuristic city, possibly referring to the Emerald City. Now, the Emerald City is a mythical city referenced in a lot of literature, however, it's most prominently featured in The Wizard of Oz. Now, a humbug is a deceptive or fraudulent person, often used to describe someone who tricks others into believing something false. The term is famously used in The Wizard of Oz, where the wizard is revealed to be an ordinary man using illusions and theatrics to appear powerful. So one of the pivotal themes of Wizard of Oz is the concept of a fake sorcerer referred to as a humbug. We see something very similar on Witheria, where all the residents are dressed up as wizards despite being scientists. Haradas calls Nami's weather science sorcery with her baton as a magic wand. Now, in One Piece, the concept of a humbug can be applied to Emu and the ancient technology from the Void Century, particularly in how Emu manipulated perception and control. So when I say Emu as a humbug, what I mean is Emu is presented as a godlike figure, ruling from the shadows, with the Gorosei and the entire world government acting as their enforcers. However, much like the wizard in The Wizard of Oz, Emu's power is hidden behind secrecy and illusion, right? So from this, readers can speculate that Emu stole the Emerald City, which is a city that features in The Wizard of Oz, and she used it to basically create the illusion that she had this giga power, and that is what would have caused the 20 kings to believe in Emu. So it's a clever twist of the whole Wizard of Oz stuff from Oda by using the Emerald City, and that Emerald City is Uranus. So in summary, throughout mythology, great trees like Yggdrasil connect realms such as heaven, earth, and the underworld. If the Adam Tree serves a similar purpose, its peak may hold divine significance in One Piece, just like Marie-Joie does. Oda manifests this heaven realm as the Emerald City, aka Asgard in One Piece, a technologically advanced city established by the Birkans that once lived on the moon. This advanced technology leads the city's inhabitants to be worshipped as gods by the local giants that live on the Adam Tree. Fitting themes throughout the story, at the great cost of local resources, a flame fuel was likely developed, allowing the city of Asgard the ability to fly and go around the world, affecting weather elements, foreshadowed by Witheria and the Alabastan town I mentioned earlier. During the Void Century, the Emerald City of Asgard was likely stolen by Emu and used on Eni's lobby, after which the Emerald City fell into myth. Centuries later, after developing generations of inherited technology, Vegapunk manages to reignite the Mother Flame, which is subsequently stolen by York for the world government. Emu reignites Uranus with the Mother Flame and tests it on Lelia. The heat from the Mother Flame causes ice to melt and sea levels to rise by 1 meter. In 1137, we see a depiction of Uranus striking the tree, and 3 stages are mentioned, the latter of which we are told is the current timeline. As such, it appears that events depicted will repeat themselves, as we see with the God Valley incident, etc., adding to the idea that Uranus will destroy the Adam Tree. By doing this, a great fire will start, I believe, and frozen giants will start to be thawed, will be released, and they will fight demons that come from the fire, which is in line with Ragnarok. This will trigger the Great War and the final part of the Third Age. But what I want to know from you guys is, will Loki make it all the way? We've just seen him stand up, and yeah, it's pretty impressive. So let me know your theories in the comments and I'll be sure to reply. Now, the video does talk about Uranus and the Emerald City and sort of covers a broad theory in that sense. However, there is more to dig into this if it does turn out to be true, which I might cover in an upcoming video. What I'm talking about specifically is the fact that it doesn't seem to be a coincidence that Lunarians are found at the top of the red line, Skypians are found at the top of Skypea, and Birkans are found at the top of Elbath. It would suggest that the 3, when they descended, sort of spread out across the world, which would have big implications on the lore, because most readers believe that these sky races are attached to just the Sky Islands, right? Like right in the Skypea Jaya section. Another quick aside is that Vivi is connected to Uranus, and her alter ego is Miss Wednesday. Wednesday comes from the Norse-inspired Woden's Day, which comes from Odin's Day, and Odin is the king of Asgard. So there are some ties woven in there potentially. I mean, we could even go as far as to say as there may have been a Nefertari around that way. Also, if anybody's got any ideas about Giant Jack, that just let me know. Some people believe it's a part of the Adam Tree, and it like goes literally 10,000 meters more sidewards. But it's strange because we have the Adam Tree on the one end of the planet, the Eve Tree on the other end of the planet, and the Giant Jack is a little sapling in the middle. So there might be another connection there to the way that the Sky people descended from the moon. But at this point, I'm just kind of rambling on. So if you made it this far, you've just won a free book from the Elbath Library. Let me know in the comments where you want it delivered. Thank you very much for listening. Absolutely massive shout out to GrowthSt0nks. There's a couple links in the description for some other creators that have similar videos, so make sure you check them out if you want more on the subject. If you want a more direct and personal contact, make sure you hit us up in the Discord. And keep your eyes out, because in a couple days we're dropping an absolute massive video. Toodle pip.